Hello everyone, good afternoon. Welcome to the Metering in the Rec training. My name is Amy and I work for the Rec Code Manager. I'm the Communications and Events Officer. I have joining me today Dave Wright and Helen Fosbury. So just to get us started, I'll go through a few bits of housekeeping. This session is being recorded and the recording and slides for this event will be made available on the Rec portal next week. If everybody could please keep their microphones and cameras off unless they're speaking, it would be greatly appreciated. So for your questions today, we're using Slido and you can access Slido via the QR code that's currently on screen. If you have a smartphone, you can scan this QR code with the camera app, or you can type the number on screen into Slido in your web browser. Alternatively, if you're using the desktop app for Teams, you'll be able to see an S at the top of this call where you can click and access Slido. There may be two different icons with the S on. If you do have that on your screen, please select the one that has the S with the 1 next to it. So feel free to raise your questions as they come to you throughout the session. We will have designated sections for Q&A at the end of each agenda item. So I will now pass over to Dave to take us through the agenda for today. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks, Amy. Welcome all. So this is the third session. So we've done gas metering, we've done electricity metering, and now we're looking at the REC itself. Now, I'm not going to claim credit for all the slides here because a lot of work has been done by Helen and her team on producing wikis, which are excellent within the REC portal itself. So in effect, a lot of the information today is available within the REC wikis. What we've done here is take the information and trying to put it into a format to give you what we could only be classed as a whistle-stop guide to the REC itself and its operation, especially around metering. So if anybody does get a chance to go and have a look, if you go into the knowledge area, so there are the wikis in there, and they are broken down into useful resource chunks. All right, if you want to go straight to the first slide, please. Okay, so to enable the REC to function effectively over the last few years, a number of committees were established, and each one of those has a specific responsibility, and we'll go into what the major part of the responsibilities are in a minute. However, all the panels are populated via a nomination and election process and are elected for a 2-year term. Now, there has been discussions recently about staggering the terms because in effect everybody was appointed at the beginning of September 21. So in effect, we will get to the point where actually everybody's tenure will come to an end at exactly the same point. And that's a risk to the panel, it's a risk to everything else. So they are looking at changing that. So the committees are primarily tasked with the review and ratification of the code manager proposals for change. So the committees also play a role in issuing the definition, the responsibilities, solution identification. But the solution identification itself actually fits primarily with the code manager, and we'll come on to that in a bit. So in effect, you've got a change panel, a Green Deal panel, a metering expert panel, a technical expert panel, and a performance assurance board. Now, the interesting thing being is the Green Deal panel, although established, is still yet to meet, and that's due to changes and the speed of things going through. And the biggest new one that's come to fruition for metering organisations is the Performance Assurance Board, which for those suppliers and people that were used to dealing with Elexon and the BSCP will be aware of the concept, but potentially not how it works within metering. So if you think of, if you're just going to go, if that's stay on this slide for the minute. So in effect, what you've got is the change panel provides an oversight on the whole of the check panel. So if you think about the change panel is actually made up of a domestic gas and or electric supplier, a non-domestic gas and electric supplier, a gas network operator, an electricity network operator, and a meter equipment manager. So within the REC change panel, I'm actually the meter equipment manager, sitting on that panel. Again, like all the other panels, it's a 2-year tenure, and out of that, it's all based on an election and nomination process. The metering expert panel, in effect, it's a subcommittee of the REC change panel. So the REC change panel is the senior panel, and everything else sits underneath that. And it's responsible for all meter related changes, which we'll look at in a bit more detail in a minute. And again, it's made up of various individuals. So there are 2 gas and electricity suppliers, there are 2 gas transporters and distribution network operators, and 2 metering equipment managers. So that's what the makeup of them. Your Greendale panel is made up of 3 members nominated by suppliers, and 3 members nominated by Greendale providers. And finally, there is 1 independent subject matter expert appointed by the RECO. But like I say, that panel's still to meet. The Performance Assurance Board, again, has specific responsibilities, which we'll look at in a minute, but they predominantly look after qualification and maintenance of the code. And they're made up of 3 suppliers, a gas transporter, a distribution network operator, a meter equipment manager, 1 BSc performance assurance administrator, so from the balancing settlement code, 1 uniform network code performance assurance framework administrator, 1 consumer representative, and 3 independent performance management experts appointed by the REC. So again, they have their own individuals in there. And the last one is the technical expert subcommittee, and they're responsible for system related issues and service definitions, and that's made up of a domestic supplier, a non-domestic supplier, a gas transporter, an electricity network operator, and again a meter equipment manager. So that's what that's the panels that were set up, that were established. So if we go on to the next slide, please. So for these individuals, in effect, the responsible committees, each one has their own responsibilities. So the main one, the change panel, they're responsible for the main body of the REC, its interpretations and its definitions. They were also responsible for the transition, and that transition still continues while we look at other codes and moving things around. So some things may move from BSc into here, into the REC. Some things may move the other way at certain points. However, they'll manage that process. Accession agreements and company governance. Change management. Now, change management's, the change panel is responsible for the management of the change, but not potentially the delivery of. So in a lot of cases, they will potentially be responsible for moving the change through the process rather than anything else. Energy theft reduction, unbilled energy code of practice, the charging methodologies, so whatever repairs, prepayments arrangements, data access, transfer of consumer data, smart meter installation, the secure data exchange, market exit, and the MRA SPA transition schedules, which was a major part of it. Performance Assurance Board. Now, it doesn't seem that there's a lot in there when it talks about performance assurance and qualification and maintenance. When we look specifically at qualification and maintenance later, you'll see there is a huge amount of responsibility here for assessing not only access to the REC and acceding to it, along with then maintaining that and guaranteeing the standards. And it's there to measure and improve market performance. And it uses a performance assurance methodology to actually do that. Now, one of the things that people need to be aware of under here is that there is a thing called the PARC. So this is a document that has to be filled in regular by certain organisations so that they can continue to attain their accreditations. So some of the data may be monthly, some of it may be weekly. So this is the performance assurance report catalogue, and it's basically a list of reports and relevant data items that are utilised for measuring the performance against the REC. So the required data has been identified on the risk register or performance measures identified in the REC service definition, and this data that the parties are required to provide directly is collected by the code manager. So reports are currently required on either a monthly or quarterly basis as identified in the catalogue, and the individuals that are responsible for producing those reports, you have distribution network operators and gas distribution network operators. There are suppliers, and gas meter equipment managers are all responsible for providing data into there. And then finally, there is the performance assurance operating plan, again, which the PAB's responsible for. Green Deal, so the Green Deal panel, as mentioned, has yet to meet. So they're responsible for all the Green Deal arrangements, how it's set up, the definitions and the codes, and the service definition on how the system operates. I'll come back to the technical expert group last of all, but the metering expert group. So the metering expert group is where many of the documents that people who are MEMS or MOPS, as was the old term, has a lot of their documents being moved into on where the responsible groups sit. So metering operations sits in there, so how meter equipment managers operate and how they work within the industry. Their accreditation sits within there. Now, even though the accreditation is managed and monitored by the PAB, the documentation and the responsibility for the documentation sits within the metering expert group. The gas MCOP. So for those that you were previously on the gas meeting, will be aware that this was originally called the MAMCOP. And has now been moved as the MCOP into the REC. And the electricity, what was originally the MACOPA, for those that sat on the electricity version, is now under here as the MACOP. Now, the other interesting thing being is that those two documents are still in the process of being consolidated, and when the audit regime is established and up and running fully to the new version, it will be under the new what they call the COMCOP, which is the Consolidated Codes of Practice, which will combine both the gas and the electricity. And finally is the ASCOP. So this is the Automated Meter Reading Service Provider Code of Practice. Again, it will come under the COMCOP. So you will see that those terms in effect start to disappear. The technical expert group is basically a group that's looking at the electricity service definitions. So they're responsible for the data type activity that goes on to make it all work. So the central data provisions for both gas and electric, and all the data specifications. And the last one that you see right at the bottom, the REC board, all those committees report into the REC board. So they're basically a REC board that is appointed and works directly for the Retail Energy Code, for the REC, and they'll look after the terms of reference and any reserved matters for any of the responsible areas. Okay, thanks, Amy.
So we've just had one question come through so far. What's the definition of expert for metering and technical panels, but no expert for green deal or change panels?
Yeah, it's an interesting term is the word expert. Basically, they're looking for people with technical competencies, so that understand the legislation and the general operation of the physical aspects of the metering and its associated components. So where you're looking at the metering panels and the technical panels, these are individuals who have got absolute in-depth knowledge of the systems and how they all integrate, rather than a general overview, which is where the green deal type of activity comes in.
Thanks, Dave. That's the only question we've received so far. Just a reminder for anyone who joined us late, you can join Slido by scanning the QR code that's currently on the screen with your smartphone or typing the number on screen into your browser at slido.com. We'll be taking all your questions through Slido today. Are you happy to move on, Dave?
Absolutely. Okay, if you want to go to the next slide, please. Okay, so a session. So for those parties that were long established over the years, then they were automatically acceded to the REC. As the REC went live, those parties moved over. For a number of parties that were new to the market, they then had to what they classed accede to the REC. And there are two forms of accession. So there are those that absolutely have no choice. So they're the required parties, and those parties that require a service but don't fall under the banner of one of the required parties. So if you look at the required parties, first of all, so any gas or electricity supplier has to be a member of the REC. There is absolutely no choice. Any distribution network operator, and that's both gas and electric, have no choice. Any gas transporter, and along with that, any metering equipment manager organisation. So all those have to go through the process of accession to the REC, and I'll go through that process in a short while. For other organisations, there may be companies that just require certain data. So there was originally under the old systems a system called ECOS, which was the online electricity system that allowed you to look at an MPRN, which is now being called the Electricity Inquiry Service. So anybody who needs access to that may not be a registered required party, but may need the data. The Gas Inquiry Service has now fallen under there. So it was originally by Exoserve, now sits under here. Greentail Central Charge Database, and the Central Switching Service. So for those organisations that don't fall under one of the left-hand categories but require this data, there is a slightly different accession route to become a member of the REC. So we can go to the next one, Amy, please. Now, it's probably not the clearest of slides, isn't this? However, if we can, I'll work my way through it for you. So in effect, for any party, it's up to them to decide which route which category they actually fall into. So for argument's sake, at the top of the page, it starts with gain REC portal access. So in effect, for anybody to access the REC portal, literally anybody can apply for access. It needs very little data. It just needs your name, address, telephone number, email address, and I think it's organisation. I think that's the only thing that you actually need. But it's not asking you for what reason you're wanting it. So in effect, anybody can have access. From that point onwards, then, if you're then going to become a member or to need to accede to become a rec party, you then have to complete an entry assessment application form. Now, the idea of the entry assessment application form is to start to determine why it is you're going to need to become a rec party, or whether you need to be a rec party or not. So currently, if you're a rec party, you would have acceded to the rec. So before the rec went live, and if you were already party, you completed that form. If everything was on that form and you were a previous party, then in effect you would have acceded to the rec automatically. In effect, nobody will now fall into that category because all that date has passed. So anybody now coming into the group will need to go through the full accession process. Now, oops, I pressed the wrong button on my system. So to go through the accession process, you can see there's actually 3 legs. So if you take the left-hand leg first of all, this is the box on the left says agree entry assessment plan. Now, basically, what happens is you will be assigned a manager to help you through this process, and dependent upon what you need to do or what you need to go for, each level has its own assessment plan. So if you are an electricity supplier, distribution network operator, meter operator, equipment manager, gas supplier or gas transporter, you will go down the left-hand leg. And I'll take you through that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But basically, there are also different levels within the legs depending on what you need to do. So there's certain tests that you might need to complete. So if you're a MAM, for argument's sake, you will have to do testing of your systems and internal testing and assessment to make sure that your systems can transmit the data. If you were just a gas AMI, so an approved meter installer, you don't have any systems, so you will be exempt from that type of activity. You would have independent tests, central switching tests if you're doing dual fuel, or you're what you call it, if you're going to be a meter equipment manager that does electric or gas, so you would have those. And then you would have to submit all your data and go through as a qualifying party. And at that point, you will be assessed, and that could involve site assessments. Or in fact, for most organisations, it will involve site assessments. For the centre one, if you're a non-party and you're just wanting access to the electricity information system or the gas information or the central switching user, then you will go down the centre route. So again, there are some prerequisites that you need to complete. You would need to do some independent service test, and then you will have to go through your qualification process. And the right-hand one is the Green Deal version. So anybody that's a Green Deal user will go down the right-hand leg and complete the prerequisites. And then once you've done all that, you would then go through into what you call annual maintenance. Now, the annual maintenance, just for those that aren't aware, has to be done on the anniversary. So it has to be completed on the anniversary of you acceding to the rec. So in effect, they will ask you for certain data to be published and sent to you, so that you can return it to ensure that you're ongoing compliance. Okay. If you go onto the next slide, David, please. So if you take a look at a little bit more detail about what it would mean for a gas or an electricity MEM. In effect, we went through the first part of the process. So you would gain your portal access, you'd complete your entry assessment form. Now, bearing in mind that these entry assessment forms are online, they are on the REC portal. So that's one of the reasons why you need access to the REC, because a lot of this is managed through the REC performance assurance area. So it allows you access to the forms and the documents. So you complete your rec assessment per fuel. So if you look at gas at the top, the first thing it's going to ask you is, are you a meter installer only, or are you what would originally classed as a MAM, so a meter asset manager? Now, bearing in mind that the rec uses the term MEM, it's still worth remembering the term MAMs and MOPs. So if you look at the top leg, in effect, the first thing it's going to ask you for is a business solutions architecture document. The document consists of a number of questions, and it consists of things like, how do you manage your health and safety? How do you manage your operatives? How many operatives have you got? What work are you doing? Where's your manuals? What insurance documents have you got? And if you then had systems that you were going to be using, there would also be information about your systems and how you test your systems. There is then what they will class as an initial assessment, and the initial assessment tends to be a desktop exercise. And what happens with the desktop exercise is that they will run through all the documentation and information that you've sent, and then it will go out. If you are going to be physically working on site with installers and things like that, they will then arrange for a scheme audit. And it's only on successful completion of that that you actually receive your certification. So that's how the gas works. The electricity is slightly different. So again, for electricity, you still have to fill in a business solutions architecture document. Now, the interesting thing being is there are two routes then. So will I be sending information on the data transfer network? You would then have to prove your internal testing that you are capable of doing that. Or will you actually require access to the ecosystem? So if you remember, it's now called the Electricity Inquiry Service, the EES, then again, you would have to do independent testing. There is another route, which if you look, goes straight through the middle, which basically says, I'm not going to be sending any information because I'm going to be working for organizations that are going to be doing that for me. And I'll be using their system. So hence, there is a route bypassing the internal testing or the ISDP. There is then an initial headquarters audit. So the initial, if you looked on the gas, it was classed as an initial assessment. On the electricity, it's classed as an initial HQ. Again, it follows very, very similar routes of the fact of they want to know what type of operatives have you got. So have you got what we call current transformer operatives, so that work on the large power systems? Have you only got domestic? How many of those individuals have you got? How do you train them? How do you do any of the work? How do you schedule your work? How do you transfer information? How do you make sure that they maintain safety? And all the associated documents, along with, have you got the correct level of insurance for public indemnity and employer's liability? There is then an additional step that says confirm sealing IDs. So in effect, for organizations within the electricity side, they will always use sealing players, and the sealing players have to be unique. Now, what will happen is they will have to apply to the rec and say, I need a sealing player ID. And in effect, it is a code which stamps onto the sealing players so that when you crimp the seals, it puts an indentation on the seal. That indentation is not only unique to the company, it's unique to the individual that stamped them and used them. And therefore it's used in accident investigations, it's used in fire investigations, it's used in tampering, so that in effect we can tell who was the last person on site, who last interacted with that piece of equipment. So all those IDs have to be unique, and that's the reason why they have to have those confirmed, so that no two organizations or no two individuals are holding the same set. Now, there was a change in the documentation 3 years ago, which basically said if you've got a set of ceiling pliers and you're holding them, but that operative now leaves, you can take those you have to take those ceiling pliers off them. When they've been taken off them, as long as your system can say it was removed from this operative on this date and it's now being reissued to this operative on this date, you're allowed to reuse them. Prior to that, they had to be destroyed. So there is now a massive cost saving to the industry by changing that ruling. If any are lost or stolen, you have an obligation to report it to the REC so that they can monitor it. Once all that's done and everything's set up, you are then going to have a site visit. The number of site visits that you will receive will depend upon how many operatives you've got and what sort of work you're going to be doing and in what areas. Once successfully completed, you'll actually receive your certificate and you're then free to go off and work. In effect, for either of those processes, they both then fall into the annual maintenance code of practice audits. But I'll come back to that in a short while. So if you just want to move on to the next slide, Amy, please. So just in summary, because it can be quite difficult to look at what documentation you actually need to produce and what you need to do, there is a very useful table in the assessment handbook, which is where this table's come from, which tells you which documentation you actually need to fill in. So if you can see, it's split into REC parties and non-REC parties. So irrespective of who you are or what you're doing, everybody needs to fill in the entry assessment application form. And then it's only the REC parties that actually need to accede to the REC. The others are part of the REC, but they've only got access to certain parts. You then need an entry assessment plan for everybody. So how are you going to achieve the standards to make sure that you've done it? And then for most organisations, so for the electricity suppliers, the DNOs and the MEMS, they have to fill in a self-assessment form. That self-assessment form is actually your part of your business solutions architecture document. If you're going to be transmitting data, you're going to need to do the initial testing assessment, and again there's document for it. And if you're going to transmit data to other organizations and things, you're going to have to do the external testing. And then finally, you've got the last couple, your information security and data protection assessment, so that you're compliant with GDPR. And then any access agreements and the CMEC that you need to sign for DNOs and GDNOs. So at least that takes you through what documentation you'd need. All that documentation can be searched on the portal. It's all sat there. So once you go into the performance assurance area and you go into forms, you can actually pull up those documents. 90% of those documents are actually filled in online, or you can download them and re-upload them. Again, your evidence and things like that is all uploaded direct back into the portal. So whereas before we used to have to package it all up and try and send it, now it's done through the portal itself, so that it can be directly uploaded, so it's secure. So I did mention that there is a difference between a session. If you just want to go on to the next one, Amy, sorry. Bring them both up, please. Okay, so I did mention there is a slight difference between maintaining and a session. So for the MCOP, the details that you would actually need to do your initial session are things like contact details for your engineers, how your training works, your health and safety processes, your policies for vulnerable customers, any records relating to competency and training of staff, any subcontractor processes, And subcontractor processes is an interesting one. So it's not only about do you use subcontractors and how do they work, it's how do you control and maintain the relationship and ensure that they get the information that they need. What's your processes for meter installation, removal and commissioning? How do you communicate for the retail gas metering arrangements? So whether you're using things like the DTN, whether you're using IX-Link, in gas, strangely as it seems, you could actually still get away with using carrier pigeon. I've yet to see anybody do it, but it is allowable under there. The only ruling is you have to send it with the information that's determined within the RGMA, and it needs to get there within a certain time. What's your internal audit processes? So how do you manage all your staff? What are they doing? How do you manage that they keep their accreditations? Have you got a gas transporter authorization process? So these are your GT1, GT2s. So how do you ensure that you've got set and seal authorization for regulators? How do you ensure the pressure tier have you got the contacts to be able to do that? And then what's your systems and processes in relation to data flows and any internal testing of systems that you've done? So you would need all that for a session. For the electricity side, for the McCoP, you need an organisation chart, again, subcontractors, insurance, so your 10 million and £5 million public indemnity and employee liability, any company policies, so your health and safety policies, cost assessments, all those type activities, your training, your working practices, again, your technical competencies, your provisional registration. Now, the slight difference with the electricity and the gas is with electricity, in many occasions, they may have to issue you with a provisional license, which basically says that we've said, yes, everything's okay, but you haven't done any jobs yet. So we'll tell you on paper that you're all right, but what we'll come and do is we'll issue you a provisional license so you can go and get work. But what you can't, once you've done that, then we'll come out and check it, everything you said is correct. And at that point, you'd then get your full license. Any systems and processes, and again, any internal testing. Now, for many of that, you not only have to produce it for the headquarters type audit, it would then be assessed as part of your on-site assessment when they come out and do it. So it's making sure that you've said, I'm giving people a meter installation manual. What they'll do is they'll come out and said, right, okay, show me one of your operatives, show me the meter installation manual. This is what it looks like. For your annual statements, much of it is confirmation of what you've previously done. So again, you're filling in a certain form and documents will be changed. So you're going to confirm, have you got the correct details, that you've policies, you've still got the existing policies, but if you look, the list isn't as big. And that's because they've seen these things previously. They're just making sure that they're up to date and that they are being complied with. The annual statements are only the initial part. This doesn't give you your full certificate. In effect, these are just the documents that are required to start the annual process. You would still be required for the site visits as you were previously. And they differ between gas and electric, and I'll explain those in a minute. So for your McCoP annual statement, again, you're confirming your insurance, your structure, your safety requirements, your distribution requirements, your register of competent persons, your sealing and metering equipment. Now, when they say sealing and metering equipment, what they mean is, have you got a sealing player database? Can you prove who's got what? Have you reported any that's lost and stolen? Any changes to technical requirements and your internal audit process. Okay. When it comes to currently, the way it operates within the systems is for McCoP. So for the electrical MEMS, they are audited every 12 months. So even though you do an annual statement to confirm all your paperwork and your documentation, they are then physically audited every 12 months. And currently that works on a percentage number of your staff, dependent upon what type of skill level they've actually got. So it'd be X percentage of your large power individuals and X percentage of your domestic trained individuals. And they tend to rotate around the areas. So for those that are geographical companies, they will tend to try and rotate around the UK, of trying not to see the same people. Now, that's not always possible for smaller organisations, but that's the philosophy. Excuse me. For gas, even though there is an audit every year, they are classed as surveillance audits. So in effect, you will have a part audit year. So year one or year zero would be your initial accreditation. They look at absolutely everything. So your paperwork, your processes, your systems, and your employees and site visits, everything. Year two or year one, in effect, would be a snapshot view of, so yes, you've done your annual statements, but currently what they would do is they would come and have a look at some of your policies and processes and procedures, but not everything. Year two, they'd then look at further things, and then you're back into the third year of, right, it's a brand new assessment, start from scratch, we'll see everything again. So currently with the gas, it is a 3-yearly cycle. With the electricity, it is a 12-monthly cycle. Okay, thanks, Amy.
So just one question again. Where the MEM is using another accredited party other than themselves as installer, does the installer have to have separate ceiling pliers for each organisation?
It depends on the contract. So you could be working as say for argument's sake, you're working as a single entity, as a single company, but you are a MACOPA authorised party, so you have your own ceiling pliers. And if you have your own ceiling pliers, then part of your contract could be, well, actually, I'll just seal it with my ceiling pliers because I'm responsible. You could be an organisation that doesn't have MACOPA at all. So therefore you're working under another party's accreditation. You would have to use the accredited party's ceiling pliers. So that's the only two distinctions. So if you're working for multiple organisations, by rights it should be the organisation that you're working for. If you're not a MACOPA party yourself, you should be sealing it with their ceiling pliers. So they should be issuing and controlling with them, and you use them on the jobs that you do for that organisation. Hope that makes sense. It does in my head, but.
Thanks, Dave. That's everything so far.
Okay, next one then. Audits then. So I've taken you through part of the audit process. However, there is something in here that basically says that organisations need to be aware of. The first thing, it's like anything else. If you don't pay your bill, you get booted. Is the simplest way of putting it. In effect, non-payment of audit fee is automatically classed as a failure. So again, it's one of those things. A lot of organisations use purchase order and requisition systems and everything else, and with major and big organisations, some of the payment terms and everything else can be 45 days or 60 days. Just please be aware of the payment terms for your organisations, so that you can make sure that things are done in the required time. So in effect, what you've got at the top, your gas. So pay your audit fee. We'll do the site surveillance audit. And the interesting thing is the resolve of remedial actions and audit report issued. So in effect, what will happen is that if there are issues that you find that are noticed while doing it, and this goes for anything, because you'll see that this appears on all of them. Basically, they come up with what you could only class as a performance improvement plan. And that may be to say, well, actually, this isn't working, or this doesn't work. You need to change this or alter this or improve this within X amount of time. And as long as you can do that and prove it, that's absolutely fine. There's not an issue. And it might be something minor that says, actually, do you know what, we'll look at it on the next visit. We'll put it in. It may be something major, and it may be something major enough to actually stop an organisation working at that point until the issue is resolved. So there are different severities of what that actually can mean to organisations, and how you map it. When it says at the end audit report issued, the audit reports go to two places. They will always go to the organisation, and it will also go to the performance assurance board through the code manager. And that's allowing them to look at, you know, is there any trends? Is there anything that needs to be done? Is things need to be looked at? Do we need to change anything? Do we need to do anything completely different? So if you look at the next one down, the electricity in effect is run exactly the same way. Now, again, it's one of those things that says, what does that actually mean and how many will you be done? For those of you who are not aware, the whole of the audit process is currently under review and under tender, and it will be so. The current audit process, as it stays now, as it is now, may change. There may be innovation, there may be new things that come up, and slightly different ways of doing it. However, the principles will remain the same. It has always been about maintaining standards, maintaining quality, and maintaining safety. So that will continue. The only difference that you may find, or one of the advantages you may find, is the amount of time that it actually takes to do audits may be reduced, because things potentially could be combined, or things that have potentially been duplicated in the past, you will no longer have to do. Again, some of those audits will be carried out every 3 years, and some of them are desktop audits, and only a site audit where it's required. And then the last one at the bottom, so where you approach 10,000 customers and install more than 1,500 smart meters, you've got to go through the smart audit. So you've got the gas one at the top, you've got the electricity, you've got the ASCOP audit, which is the third one down, and the last one is to do with smart metering. So again, the same process works where you've notified the code manager you're ready to be audited. So basically with this one, where you've reached a threshold, you may have only had certain amount of audits up to a certain point. At some point you may reach that 10,000 customer installs, or you've declared more than 1,500 smart meters. You then need to go into the SMICOP audit as well, which is what the bottom one is. Okay, next slide, Amy, please. So, as I mentioned earlier, for the gas audit, again, it's part of the requirements, and it will be dependent whether you're a meter installer or a MEM as to how in depth these actually go. But in reality, year one will be a full audit against all the requirements, and it will be all the requirements of the MCOP. So anything that relates to a meter installer or anything that relates to and meter equipment manager, so the whole code. But it's only for the gas parts. Ignore that. So even though the MCOP, so the COMCOP eventually will be a unified document, it will still only relate to gas for this particular audit. In years 2 and 3, they're classed as surveillance audits, and they'll focus on specific parts of it. Now, the reason why it's done that way is if there are elements that organisations aren't picking up on, and it's been identified that there is an issue, then they can use that to focus on those to make sure areas. So in previous years, they've had issues where organisations haven't. So it's stipulated in the MCOP that your organisations have to have a qualified or access to a qualified iGEM engineer, whether that's incorporated or technical engineer, the TENG, or iEng, incorporated engineer. And some organisations either didn't have access to them or didn't have one on the books. So it was made as part of the audit for the following year that every organisation was checked for compliance with that. There's been other things of checking with organisations of are they carrying out things like 5 and 10 yearly inspections on medium pressure type activities, and what type of work are they actually doing, and what safety inspections are they doing. So that's just and that comes out of trend analysis, and that's one of the things that the Performance Assurance Board will look at is there things coming up on the audits that are affecting a large number of organisations that actually they need to concentrate on and address. And then year 3 onwards, again, you're back to a full audit. So your electricity audit, as we mentioned, number of whole current operatives, so those that are domestic, so up to 3 phase, and your number of current transformer operatives. And again, this is how it works now. The location of the site works. So like I said, because we're geographically dispersed for most organisations, they'll try not to use the same locations, same individuals. And the other thing that's taken into account on here, so currently the scheme works on a 3%, 5% and 7% audit regime, and that's how it was initially set up. So if you have had clean audits over the past few years, and you've maintained all your accreditations and there's been no issues, the standard requirement is that they will audit 3% of your operatives. If you've had incidents, and based on the weighting system that's in the document, organisations could have fallen over the threshold that says actually you've had enough incidents to make it a major. So a number of minor incidents could actually tip you over the edge to hit the next reporting criteria. What that would actually mean is you need to put all the corrective actions in for this year and solve those and clear those down. However, you will now be audited at 5% of your operatives next year. And if the same process happens again where you have issues, then potentially you will be audited at 7% the year after. So not only is there a time constraint on this, there then becomes a punitive cost to it, in effect of a penalty, because you pay for your audits based on the amount of time that the auditor spends with you and the volumes that they have to go through. So you can imagine for some organisations that are huge, auditing, could potentially have 1,000, 1,200 meter operatives out there. Auditing 3% of your staff, or then going up to 5 or 7, could drastically involve increase the number of days that the audit needs to go over, and therefore drastically increase the costs. So it's in everybody's best interest to hit the targets and maintain safety and standards, not only from a compliance perspective, but from a monetary perspective as well. Okay, thank you, Amy.
So we've not had any questions come through on this section currently. just a reminder that you can join us with the QR code that's on the screen if you have any questions that you'd like to raise on the section that we've just had. Otherwise, I think we can move on.
No problem. Just for those watching, this is water, it's not vodka. Okay, thought I'd just quantify that. Okay, so change management then. So one of the things that I said we'd go through while we were doing this was to look at the actual change management process and what does that actually mean. So in effect, for change management, everything is managed initially through the portal. So you can actually log on to the portal itself, and you can see under the left-hand banner, you've got, once you're logged in, changes and releases. So there is a change register in there. There is a list of all the consultations, the code map, the change calendar, and impact assessments, prioritization matrix. And prioritization matrix I'll come on to in a little bit. And if you wish to put in a change proposal, there is a big orange button on the right hand side that allows you to click that, and that allows you to actually put in a change proposal. Now the interesting thing being is since the inception of the REC, prior to that, it was predominantly industry parties that proposed changes. So those that were actively involved, engaged, and everything else. With the inception of the REC, that's now changed. Even a member of the general public can actually submit a change proposal. And that has its advantages, which means that things that potentially we can become blinkered to or anything like that can be raised by any party. They will go through exactly the same process that any other change will go through. So it would still be assessed and monitored in exactly the same way, but it just gives another route for individuals to raise it. So if you look at a change proposal itself, if you actually clicked the orange button, what you will get is the next slide, Amy, please. All right, so at the top of the page, you can see actually it tells you at what stage it's at and what you need to put in here. Now, I haven't gone through the whole thing. I've just opened the initial form. So basically what it's going to ask you when you first open this up is, who are you? Which company do you work for? Or what do you do? What's the company type? Your telephone number and an email address. And that's all the data it actually needs so that they've got the contact information to go back to you. It's then going to ask you for, okay, so what's the reason? So you click next and it'll go into the change proposal summary. So why do you want to change it? Who's going to benefit? What's it going to do? How do you propose it? It's going to work. It's then going to ask you to look at consumer impacts. So who's going to be impacted? What does it actually mean to them? What's the benefits? And then, is there any code impacts? Now, this might be an interesting question for somebody who's not steeped in this type of activity. The one thing that I would say to you is the code managers are very good. If you contact them and you want to have a discussion or anything like that, do so, because it might just alleviate some of your concerns and pressures and things like that. But again, some of these things the code manager, or many of these things the code manager will review and have a look at. And then there is the change progression. What does it actually mean? And then any other files that you want to upload. Once a proposal's gone in, if you just flick to the next slide, Amy, please. There is a whole process that we actually go through, and again, what you've got to look at with this is many people have said, how do I interact and at what point will I be notified or when changes are? So again, there is a wiki around the change process, and this is where this slide comes from. but it's worth just having a quick jog through it just to give people an idea. So the change process management is in effect the blue line that runs through the middle. So you can see we just started off at the first part with the change proposal being raised. At that point, the code manager does an initial assessment. So in effect, what's happened is you load it onto the form, it gets fired off to a code manager, and they will have a look at it and go, well, actually, is it a good thing to do? Is it a bad thing to do? Where do we want to go to it? Do I need to go back to the instigator for more information? If it's the right thing to do, we need to produce the initial assessment report so that can then go back to the relevant groups. Okay. Now then, in effect, the initial assessment report will normally end up with the change panel, and the change panel then may fire that out to different panels to go, you need to have a look. So it's more relevant to the technical expert panel, or it's more relevant to the power board, it's more relevant to the metering expert panel. But what they will do is look at a timetable and plan that says, okay, we agree that the timescales for this looks reasonable and everything else. Once that's done, it starts to engagement with service providers on solutions and options. So again, if we need, so they've just reinstigated the metering operations forums for gas and electricity, which is a good point for those to go. They don't meet, they meet once a quarter roughly, but again, it will go out to those, and it will go out to the metering expert panels or whoever for them to engage with their members and look at that report and go, right, okay, let's build this. Solution development will start, and how that starts and how it works will be dependent upon the change. There may be a working group formed to do the solution development. It may be developed by the code manager. It may have already been pre-developed by the change proposal raiser. If there's then an impact assessment, so that will go out to parties to say, right, okay, this has now been formulated. What do you want? What's your thoughts? What's your impacts? Is there going to be a massive change to this? Do we want to progress? And that comes back to the code manager then for them to review that data and put together a preliminary change report. And that then goes out for comment to responsible committees for review. Again, once that's been done, it'll go out for consultation on the change report, and the consultation with members and people and everybody who's a member of the REC that was affected by it, for them to have their input before a final change report is then developed and agreed and signed off with the change proposal decision that says it goes forward, it doesn't go forward, it's delayed, it's on hold, or it needs to be reformulated. So again, it's just a useful code map or tracker just to take you through the process. So if you go to the next slide, please. So in effect, within the whole of that process, there are certain responsibilities, and they're split up against three parts. So the code managers then, if you looked at that and mapped it back against, the code manager's got the planning, the prioritization, the change agenda, raising the change proposals, the development of and execution of the plan, the solution development, the stakeholder engagement, and the recommendation to the responsible panel. So that's down to the code manager to make those decisions. They may pull experts in to help with that decision. They may consult with other people to make that decision, but that's their job. So the change panel, they're responsible for the approval of the change proposal plans, escalation from subcommittees. So where does it need to go? And responsible committee for most category 1 documents. So anything that comes under a category 1 document, it's now up to us, up to the change panel. And the last one, the responsible committees. So they review preliminary change reports and plan for consultation, vote to approve or reject REC change, proposal and take into account the recommendation of the code manager. So for every stage, the code manager will always make a recommendation. So at the bottom of the document, it will say, this is our recommendation. So what we're asking you to do is to review it and approve it, or review it and change the amendments, or is there any changes that need to be made? And that's discussed at every panel. So it's a well-formulated outcome all the way through and tracked. And there is actually a full change proposal tracker that takes you through end to end. Okay, if you go on to the next one, Amy, please. Okay, so how some of these are done faster than others. I mentioned something that they call the change prioritization matrix. Now, again, this is slightly under review. Tina Pearson and Anne Perry from REC are working with this type of activity. But what happens is some changes may get put on hold, or they may slow up. Some may be tracked through faster because of the importance of them. And in effect, this is just a highlight of the weighting process that they use. So if there are consumer impacts, it's given a weighting of 30. So if it delivers huge benefits to customers through experience improvements, reduced detriment and costs, and it has wide social benefits, then it will be given a weighting of 30. If there's major security impacts, again, there is a weighting against that. You've got a weighting against whether it's legal and regulatory. And again, you would expect legal and regulatory to have a higher weighting, but don't forget that these things make up in totality how we do our risk matrix. So it's not just one thing that's considered. So you might have something that actually has no customer impact at all, but it's got a legal regulatory compliance, and it's massively weighted towards that direction. We get absolutely no choice. You've got to go do it. So again, it is that's the purpose of it. And then you've got your cost benefits and everything else. So when they're making decisions as to what goes forward and what doesn't go forward and what comes first and what comes second, there is a protocol behind those decisions. Those decisions are then discussed at change panels and the relevant parts. So they are currently working through a stage tracker that actually shows you where everything is, potentially to be released at some point. But at the moment, if you go on the reporting tracker, on the change tracker, you can actually currently see at what stage each individual change process is at. Okay, next, Jamie.
Sorry, just to add that the prioritisation matrix is online in the portal. I think Dave pointed it out earlier, and there is like further detailed scoring guidance there. You can actually use the prioritisation matrix yourself. So if you are thinking of a change, you can actually go on there and score it up how you think it would be, to give you an idea of where it would come out and whether it would end up being something that would be a now job later on. So you'd see whether it was critical, high, medium or low, and you could get an overall status from it. So it is available. And like Dave says, it is at the moment, it's just going through some revision. So I know that that's been shown to a few of you, but there will be further updates on what's happening with that prioritisation matrix. Thanks, Dave.
Yeah, no, thanks, Alan. Because like I said, everything that's on these slides and stuff is available in there. This is just a way of pulling that together into one session. So yeah, if you have got the time, it is worth going and having a view with the wiki documents and the stuff that's in the background. But yeah, no, it is useful. So, and I think it's fair to say that in the 12 to 18 months that the REC's been established, it's not stood still. so they are always looking at improvements and changes and things like that. And so if people have thoughts or things that they want to, you know, progress or ideas, by all means get in touch with the code manager or the rec that's on, or the individual that's on your relevant panel. So whether it be the metering or the change or whoever, all the committee members are listed on the rec portal. So if you've got suggestions that you'd like to have discussed or thoughts or anything, they've always got an open ear with stuff like that, so it is useful.
That's right, and we've also got an area of the portal where you can actually give us your improvements and your feedback. So if there's something specific you're thinking about, you can tell us about it and you can log it there and we'll pick it up. Like Dave says, with the changes, anything to do with change, you can talk to the change team beforehand. And I think you should all be aware, it came out in the bulletin last week, the week before, that there is a new issues group that's going to be started, which will be the RIG, so that's the Retail Issues Group, and that will be held monthly, and that will be an opportunity for people to discuss issues affecting, discuss any issues, raise anything related to the rec. And it may well be that that turns out being somewhere where you might want to discuss anything that impacts you prior to putting through a change. Maybe not, but it is there. That's what the issues group there for, to give the opportunity for people to get together and to discuss things that are rec related.
Okay, thanks, Alan. Next slide, Amy, please.
So just one question again. On the change process, is there a regular report available which shows new changes, rejected or withdrawn changes, and which changes have had their status updated?
So it's yes and no. It's probably the easiest way to answer this one. There is a tracker, and it is one of the things that Helen and Anne and her team are looking at, building, which shows that type of activity. So if you look on the change tracker, you can see where things are, and you can see the change, the date that it was changed, but there isn't actually a physical report currently that I'm aware of. Helen, you're probably closer to it than I am, without actually going in there and having a look at them.
Yeah, there's the change register at the moment will tell you where things are. It will tell you whether they're at initial assessment, what stage they are in the process. They'll give you an idea of the change path, change category, responsible committee, impacted parties. But as Dave says, we are looking at improving that and making that easier to go through. You can also see all of this information. There is actually a really useful user guide for the change process that will take you through these and all the different bits of documentation, and how to work your way through it.
So how would you reach the change manager? So when we talk about the change manager, it's predominantly the code manager. So if you look on the tracker, there is an individual made responsible for each change. And on there is their email address and contact number. And on every change, if you look at any of the changes, on the right hand side, there is always a box that tells you who's responsible for it with their email and contact number. So that's the easiest way to get in touch with them if it's regarding a specific change. If it's one that you're raising yourself, and it's a new one that you're looking at, and you wanted to talk to somebody, if you go through the rec portal and you look at the contact numbers on there, they will give you the contact numbers for the individuals.
Yeah, I think Millie's just updated on the chat, so you can raise a ticket and go through to the service desk, and we'll take it that way. Or there is an email directly for Rec Manager, that's inquiries@recmanager.co.uk. You can contact us that way.
Thanks, Ellen.
Thanks both. That's it for the questions at the moment.
Excellent. Okay, so the next one, the EMAR. So if you want to go onto the next page. So it took me ages to try and remember what the EMAR actually stood for, but basically this is it's an electronic responsible repository. Sorry, so it's the electricity market, it's the energy markets architecture repository. If I can get my words right. Basically, it's a database or holding area of all the documentation pertaining to the REC. And each part has its own parts to it. And in effect, what you've got here is how these interact with each other. Now I'll show you the EMAR itself, and most people will have been in and out of it. But this is just a useful diagram to explain what the component parts of the EMAR are and what they're designed to do. So if you look at the code services to start with, so the code service is the overall part of it, and the code services contain schedules. So the easiest way to think of the schedules is these are the legal text, the main body of the schedule, so what the whole thing is about, what it contains. Within those, there are a number of clauses. So basically the component parts that make up the whole of the schedule. So each one will have its own number and it will have its own reason for being. So i.e. it could be a business term. So these are the business terms that are defined in there. So, you know, the term MEM is a business term. So the metering equipment manager. So these are the definitions that are actually used. Or it could relate to the market participants. So these are the people that are responsible parties within the REC. Sorry, not the market scenarios. So these are the, for argument's sake, your flow diagrams. So how it all sits together, why you would use that certain part, and this is how you would use it, so that you can start and understand how the rules work. So your business processes, so the actions that are triggered by the rules. So you have a set of business rules which basically says, and this is what you need to do. The processes are the ones that get triggered based on those rules. So if for argument's sake, a certain flow needs to go out within a certain time, the rule will be this flow needs to be sent at this time. The process will be on how and where do I send it. So that puts those things together. And the data specification, so this contains a list of all the defined messages between the market participants. Now the interesting thing being is the data specification is used by everybody. So even though it sits in the EMAR and it sits in the REC, it's the same one that's used by the DCUSA, the BSC, the DTN, all those types. So that everybody's using the same terminology and the same classifications to make sure. And then the last one that you've got in there is your market participants. So these are the responsible parties. So who is it, where is it, what are they doing, and how do they work? So that's what all the bits within the EMAR are designed to do and how they're designed to work together. If you go to the next, so this actually shows you the project dashboard, and in effect, the whole idea of this is a one-stop shop for all your documentation that relates to you managing the business under the REC. So at the top left-hand side, you've got all your governance type documents. So your main body, so what is the REC, how does it work, any interpretations, how change management works, how performance and assurance works, what the company governance is, how we transfer the consumer data, the CDSP, the charging methodology. So how much is it going to cost you on a yearly basis, or audit wise, or your market stabilization charges, and the REC transition schedule. So they're all about the governance of the REC itself and how it works. The documents that we were talking about are at the bottom, the metering arrangements. So there you can see there you've got your ASPCOP, your electricity MACOP document, your gas MACOP, anything to do with meter accreditation, meter operations, all those type activities sit under there. Now the top 3 documents eventually will disappear. They will become the COMCOP. So the consolidated code of practice for metering will take place of those. So at least you'll know where those are. Party management, again, these documents can be accessed from other areas. So when you're on some of the front screens and things like that, it will take you off to these documents. But again, if you need to find them, you know, for things like qualification and maintenance, what does it mean? What's the schedule look like? What do you need to do? They're all in there. And all your Green Deal and your theft type activity documents are in the bottom one. There are some other documents. I haven't shown everything in here, but in effect, all those blue links are hyperlinks. Will take you direct to the document, and you can then download and view them. Just be wary, if you download anything, it becomes an uncontrolled document, so you're always better looking at them on the live site. But at least you can get access to all the other documents. You'll also see, so these are all the schedules that are on the top. You'll then see across the top bar, just under where it says project dashboard, you can see that there are other pages in relation to data specification, your market scenarios, whether there's any reports, release management, or any other REC documents that you may require access to. But your main ones are for most organisations are on this front screen. Okay, so like I said, I wanted to take you through a whistle-stop tour of the REC and its governance process and where the documents were and how it all hung together. Amy, if you wanted to go to the next slide, please. Like I said, it was the whole idea was not to make you an absolute expert on this stuff, but to give people a good feel for where they are. And like I say, I'm not taking 100% credit for the information, because, like I say, the teams have done a good job of putting the wikis together and the knowledge bases and things. So you know, all this document is available. All I've done is chunked it up to give you a quick 1.5 hour run through. So I hope you found it useful. If you've got any questions, please fire away.
We've not had any questions come through yet, but let's give everyone a few more seconds.
Helen, while they're thinking, is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, I was just going to say that all of this information, we do have user guides, so they are all sitting there, and there is also the REC Wiki, as Dave said. You can also suggest if there's stuff that's particularly piqued your interest today, or something you want more information on and you can't find it. If there's not a wiki article, you can go and you can suggest that to us, and we will create additional knowledge. So if you feel that there's stuff missing, or there's stuff that you would like more appropriate, targeted for the type of organisation that you are, just give us a shout. You can do that online through the continuous improvement page on the portal, or you can get in touch with the service desk or directly to the REC manager and let us know. And we will work to produce that for you so that information is available.
Thanks, Helen. We've not had any further questions come through, so I think we can close the session. So thank you to everyone for joining us today. I hope you found the session useful. We would really appreciate any feedback that you have on the session, and so I've set up a quick survey on Slido, which you should be able to see on your browser or on your phones now. Please feel free to submit any feedback that you may have. And yeah, thank you again. I hope you have a good afternoon.